So we all have to push got it.
Got it.
Got it. All right. Okay, so I'm actually starting this presentation. It's a presentation. I'm starting this off with a painting that for me is probably one of the most powerful paintings I own. So this is not one of the critique paintings, but I think it's kind of important to set the stage when doing a critique to kind of know where my head is at, right? Because I'm looking at your paintings. So this is a painting that was, I had a friend who was with kind of big tobacco in Russia. And in the 90s, if you wanted to do business with Russia, you had to support their sanctioned artist. So this artist is Alex Mandendelev. I'm hoping I say that correctly. And it is, if you actually look at a critique, this has probably got so many little issues that we would pick on from a critique point of view. But I have to tell you guys, this is the most powerful painting I own. People see this painting and they love it. For all of its flaws, they love it. So I wanted to start off a critique this way because I don't think that having a perfect painting is necessarily everyone's goal. I mean, this is a high-level artist from Russia. And if we just, three things that first come to mind is I look at this little hand on the left. Do you see my cursor?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
the hand has 4 fingers, right? I have 2 kissing edges, and actually the artist bent this one to make it fit the frame. Like we would be all over that, right? So I just wanted to start off with this because I need you to kind of realize that whatever I may be seeing in your painting doesn't mean you have to change it, okay? And it doesn't mean it's wrong, and it doesn't mean it's still not a great painting. So I love to put that out there like that because some people react differently to critiques. I know this group has fairly thick skin, but I still felt I had to do this, okay? So
Anita, how big is this painting?
It is about 30 by 40 or a little bigger with the frame. So it's quite a big painting. You know, this artist kind of, he had a history in theater, obviously. So you see that through his art. Okay, so I'm going to close this guy down if it lets me.
What is the title to it? Do you know, Anita?
It's in Russian. Like all of the documents I have are in Russian. And so this friend of mine who actually collected this piece, he must have thousands of pieces of art. So I bought this piece from him. I mean, that's how long he was doing business in Russia. Okay, so I'm doing this critique in no particular order. It's kind of based on the way I saved my document. And I believe in having a lot of visuals because we're all visual people. And Carol, you get to be first. With a name like Zuckerman. There we go. Okay. Okay, let's see if it's going to open. Okay. Oh, wrong one. Sorry. Stop. Okay. So I kind of like that we started with this painting because there's a bit of information that I want to share with the group. And maybe Carol, you can tell me if this is true of your painting. So one of the things I've been fighting with personally is how my documents, my paintings show up when I send them from my iPhone to my computer. And what I learned in speaking to my best friend Google is that they read color differently. The phones have a different form of RGB coding that they use. So when you go from iPhone to a computer, the computer sees less colors. So I kind of think this may be what's happening in this image and several of the images that came in today. So I'm going to kind of, first of all, like tell everybody, if you're sending images and you know you're going to someone's computer, you should send them from a computer so the colors kind of read a little bit more true. Okay, so that being said, I have a version of this where I've kind of done a little color correction. You can also, if you look at the image, and sometimes I like to do this just so we can see what it probably would look like. If I just change the exposure on this, right? Like I start to see a much richer painting, and I see you're
Yeah.
shaking your head yes, and you're like, yes, that's my real painting. Okay, so when I look at this painting, I love the fact that I don't see sky. I mean, the painting is of a woman picking lavender. The title is Harvesting Lavender. It's a 16 by 20 acrylic. And there's a lot of really great things kind of happening in this painting. I'm sorry, I have to go back to this. There is a lot of movement that is kind of being created, and I'm just kind of watch for my cursor with the way that this whole painting has been laid out and stepped back. So I love that my eye actually travels all through this painting. The lightest spot is kind of right here where her hat meets the sky. So you kind of really see the focal point, like she is the focal point. She's also pretty much on the rule of thirds, which kind of, brings that point home. From a critical point of view, I'm looking at the fact that the darkest darks are really these pieces that she's holding, the lavender that she's picked. And so what that kind of does is it takes this foreground, which is closer to the viewer, and it blends it into what's happening behind her. So when you look at this, you see that the colors kind of they basically are all in the same tone, so you don't feel the sense of depth that actually is in this painting. So as a visual person, I have done a little modification on your painting, so don't freak out when I flip it, but I'm looking at the addition of darks. And so I think when I go back to your original with a lighter value on the person, she looks a little bit awkward, but when you actually add the darks, you see that she's perfectly drawn. Okay, so sorry, I'm flipping. Like you see her bending over. It's just a question of really pumping up the darks, right? And by darkening the foreground here, it's adding more depth to your painting, right? Do you see it? So I guess my goal today and these critiques, and they're going to be very short because there's 19 of them, is basically to kind of send you away with a thought, right? So the thought that I have for you, Carol, is I think that your composition is fabulous. Like it's very, very pointed, but the difference that would make, like the thing that would make super difference in your painting would be actually pumping up the darks and looking at the tonal values. Like this being the darkest thing, I think, although it drew my attention, it kind of took away from the depth, right? And the other thing I did, which you can't really see very well in this, is I actually pumped up the light here. So I'm kind of trying to create a little bit of contrast right here, because that's really, you want them to look at her concentrating on picking these lavenders, right? So that's me, I'm always pushing light. So this is where I'm pushing the light right here. So that's a suggestion.
That's
Okay.
awesome. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on, no particular order. I'm going now to what was for me probably the hardest one. And this will be, hold on. I've done these in documents. Oh, you're not in order. Hold on, maybe I didn't see. Oh, I have it written on a paper, the order, so I have to follow that. Okay, so this is Diana Palmer. So Diana Palmer has a painting called The Spectator. It's 16 by 20 acrylic. It's done fairly monochrome is what I'm seeing on my screen. I actually think if I pump the color, I start to see a little bit more warm tones come in where the sun is setting or rising in this painting. So when I'm looking at this, I kind of see that she's basically framing 2 points here. You have the bird or the spectator, and you have this very man-made structure. And this sunset or sun, I think it's a sunset, is coming down in between the two. So your eye is actually going into that point. And this here is kind of, I believe, on the rule of thirds, right? So I think that compositionally that works. I do always struggle when I see a painting that has something very man-made, because we're kind of trained to go to hard edges, right? And so this area right here, I keep moving my focus to this area, even though based on the name of this painting, this is really the focus, right? The spectator. So I played around with this, Diana, and I struggled. This was a really tough one because it's your painting deals a lot in subtleties, right? So we have all these subtle bits of light coming through. I do think that maybe these lines shouldn't be quite as broken. I think the transition from like distance going backwards in space by the changes in color really works. It's a little bit, again, I have a problem with the color, like the way this came through. I'm going to just do this on my computer and I get a little bit stronger feeling of the painting, right? Is that closer to what's real?
That's closer.
Yeah. So I kind of look at this and I'm a little bit confused here whether these are one continuous mountain or it's a very sharp drop, right? Because of that big color shift. And it also lines up kind of with the light. So I think that I would be a little bit careful about that and try to kind of bring the light over without breaking the form, right? The other thing I see there's a bit of patterning going on, and I don't know if that's necessary, but it's not like a tremendous distraction. I think this is really, this crowding in this corner is really kind of something that I would try to change. Oh, it just went back, sorry. Hold on, did something crazy with it. Okay. So I did try something and it was hard because I don't have the skill set in PowerPoint to do this. So I'm closing that, but I wanted to show you what would happen if you moved this man-made item to this other point. Now I had to crop it because I don't have the tools, right? But if the sun were hitting this man-made item and your spectator, I would probably put him on this side, was here, I kind of find that the painting has a little bit more power, right? And again, you know, it's subjective, right? This is me kind of giving you an opinion on this. And it may absolutely change the way you wanted to represent this painting. And if that's the case, reject it, right? But just from, you know, the little bit that I did, I kind of thought, well, these light, which is a very powerful part of your painting, if it were hitting this object, it would kind of change the way you see the spectator. So that's that.
Yeah, good idea.
Okay, so moving on. I'm trying to do 5 minutes, so sorry if I'm feeling like I'm rushing a little bit because I know you all don't want to be here 3 hours, which I could have happen. That won't let me close. Okay. Oh, I didn't want to save that. Anyway, close. All right, next. Okay, this was another challenging one for me. Delora. Okay, here we go. Okay, am I on the original? Yes. All right. So this painting, I don't believe that Delora named it. It was kind of a work in progress when she submitted it. It's a 24 by 24. I believe it's acrylic. Yeah, I do believe it's acrylic. And the only comment that Delora gave me at the time was that she was doing a tonal study, right? Is that correct? Anyway, so I'm looking at this painting, and to me, I'm not looking at it in terms of it being a study. I'm looking at it in terms of it being a painting, right? And so the first thing that I'm looking at is composition, and I think it has a really, really great composition. I have a lot of leading lines, and I really enjoy the fact that this edge right here kind of forms this little pyramid that kind of sends me back down into the painting. So I'm liking that perspective. I think it's a little bit unusual, and I think it definitely grabs your attention. And I think it really helps to kind of focus you on the softness, this hard edge, all of this happening here creates a great space for you to see the softness of what's happening on the figure itself. Okay, so when I'm looking at this painting and I'm, you know, as a critique, I'm saying, okay, well, what is it that she's telling me? And you're basically, as a viewer, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, I want you to kind of see how this person just stands out to you with very little I'm giving you very little information, but I'm telling you a whole story, right? And so I kind of look at that, and one of the things that kind of struck me that would actually add to this story is I think if there were some softening of the lines. So my really, like, I think that the colors are, you know, it's a very muted palette, it's a very simple palette, but I think that the edges maybe would be where I would focus. And so I kind of took what you did, and in a very rough way with this Photoshop tool that I'm not very good at, I actually did, oh God, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that either. I did this little bit of lightening where I lost some of the edges. So as a portrait, the very first thing you look at are the eyes. And in the original, I found that the eyes, the dark complete circles around the eyes were a little bit distracting. And I think, like, it's the very first thing you see, and my eye keeps going back to it because it's one of the darkest spots. And I think that softening that eye actually, maybe not the way I did, that looks a little freaky because, you know, I have only a limited tool, but just that softening of the eye really kind of humanizes this painting a little bit, right? And that is really an opinion. But I do think that part of our job when we are telling a story is to lose some edges so that we actually have the viewer very intrigued in the painting. So my feeling was losing some of the edges in the eye would add a lot of intrigue, right? The other thing that I did is I found that the leading line, if you look at the leading line, you're leading me off the canvas here, and this line is absolutely probably the least necessary line in the painting. So I took that out. And the other thing that I did, because I have a fairly dark background here, so this background puts that building fairly close to the person. So, you know, I do want to create depth all the time. I'm looking to create depth. And so by taking a color that's even darker than this, which is just a little bit here, it pulls the figure forward. So now the depth in the painting is increased, right? I'm going to show this third piece, which is Delora did another version before she sent me this one, which is a current version. And it's the same piece where she lightened this, right? And so, you know, it was kind of an interesting test to look at the two. And I can go back to this one, whether it's a stronger piece with it lighter or darker. And from my perspective, if this bit here, sorry, is darkened, it doesn't really change the painting dramatically for me. It does, I feel, push the building back a little bit. If you go to the lighter version, it makes the building recede, so it adds depth there too. But I don't think that either one, like, they both make a strong painting. So that's
okay. That's really good. Thank you, Anita. It's actually not a building. She's sitting in front of the buffet in her aunt's dining room. And so that's what
you know
you're
what?
seeing.
I thought it was a building because this looked like clouds.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, it could be anything, really.
Yeah, it was a painting sitting up there on top of behind the buffet. So.
Oh, that's crazy. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So we're moving on.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Closing that. I'm not saving it. Okay. Next one. I'm on number 4, and number 4 is going to be Denise. Denise with simplicity. Okay. So Denise, you're going to hate me on this one. I know you are. Okay. So this is, I mean, it's important to kind of to know the materials. This is actually a pastel. It's a fairly small piece. It's 12 by 16. The title is Simplicity. And I kind of like, that was an intriguing title for me because I'm looking at this and I'm like, what is she trying to tell me? Like, we are just focusing on this main subject. Maybe there's a lot of space behind this bird. So maybe we're just looking at just taking in the beauty of this main subject, right? So like the names for me are very important. Like, they tell part of the story and it changes the way I see the paintings. So I'm looking at simplicity, and I think that the drawing of the bird is well done. The proportions are right on. I don't find that like this tail, although it seems close to the edge, it doesn't seem shortened to me. I don't know this bird that well, but I did paint decoys back in the day. And I love this. Like this is, I'm sorry, I'm being very personal. This is really well done. The way that the bird is turning its head kind of backwards and the beak is just lit up. So I kind of go back to this, I have this real thing about pushing lights and pushing darks. So I'm going to switch you now into my adapted version of your painting, Denise. And so just remember, it's my thing. I'm pushing light, pushing dark. It may not be your thing. So this is the version where I'm pushing light and pushing dark. So I just took an erasing tool and I've erased some of the darkness that's on the back of the bird. And so what this does is it kind of creates a little bit more of a 3D feeling for this guy. And I think you can also get that by, there's a lot of hard edges in the feathering here. And I think softening some of those edges would do it as well, keeping the hard ones in certain spots and then softening as you turn. I did darken the underside of the bird, like kind of in this S shape, right? Yeah. And I darkened, because his head is tilted, I darkened like under his cheek here so that the light was really hitting right here. Like I really wanted that light to kind of focus on his head, right? I think the background works beautifully with that. I didn't touch the background. And now with him darkened, your background even like reads deeper, right? So I'm always pushing for depth. I'm always pushing for darks and lights. My takeaway for you on this painting, besides the darks and lights, which I think I'm going to repeat to everybody, I would like to see a little bit of space. And when I say that, I'm talking about this right at the bottom. Do you see my cursor? I'm kind of coming down here. And he's almost standing on the edge of this, of your canvas or your paper, I guess a pastel. I would love to see him just a little bit further back so that I see a little bit more space in the foreground. And it would actually increase the depth on this piece as well, right? So that's kind of what I focused on for you. So,
well, I love what you did to him.
Oh,
I think that's great. I wish I'd have thought of it.
You will now, though, because you're going to remember I'm saying push the light, push the dark, push the light, push the dark. And honestly, like, I mean, there's not a huge difference. This is your original, right? I just flipped back, and it's not a huge difference, but it's just enough of a difference, right? It's not huge. I didn't change anything else, like just that dark on one side, light on the other.
Okay. No, I really like that. I would, as I say, I wish I'd have thought of it. Awesome. Yeah.
Okay.
It did get accepted into the Animalis show in Vancouver.
See, so maybe I'm wrong and I'm too.
Oh, no, you're not wrong. It would have got an award.
Okay, moving. All right, Denise, unfortunately, you get to be it again.
Oh, dear.
It's just the way my documents laid
That's
out
okay.
in here.
I had to pick something that wasn't going to be put in a show, right?
Okay.
You can't have a critique on something that's going to go, and that already sold. So that wasn't going to go in the show. So
this one sold?
Yes, it did.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So here is it's another pastel. Is that correct?
Yes.
Pastel on matte board.
Yes.
It's called Two Birds and One Worm. I love the title. I think it really, really tells the story. And the minute I read the title like this, everything made sense to me. The bird flying at the other bird. Again, I think your proportions are really great. I don't know if this is the real color, but guess what I'm going to do? I am going to darken. I'm going to darken your painting. I do want to kind of add two things before I do that. And I mentioned space in the other painting. And I think this is a painting where space would be really important. Maybe not so much in the foreground, but I think actually on this side to have shifted, to make it into a bigger painting, because I'm not worried about moving these. Like this is like in the thirds, this would all fall on the thirds. And this guy is kind of the subject because he's trying to steal the the worms, and this is how I talk in my head, right? But
Okay.
if there were more space on here, I feel like this guy has a place to go. So it makes the
Oh,
painting
yes.
kind of powerful, right? So it's giving
Yeah.
him a place to run. So I get this feeling that he's going somewhere, right? And I kind of, that's a real subtle thing. The other thing, then I'm going to go back to my darks. And I did two things here. So I darkened this guy's wing. I don't know this bird that well, so I'm hopefully did it well enough. And I think it helped pull him away from the background, right? So I'm just flipping back and forth for you. Hold on.
I sure like what it did to the water. Oh, I love the water there.
Yeah, so what I did, it's
better.
so I'm always
more
thinking
life,
depth, Denise, right?
Yeah.
So I just kind of in my mind, the light's hitting these birds, there's got to be something darker happening in the foreground. So when I darken the foreground like this, it makes your background feel lighter and more distant, right? The other
Definitely.
thing that I would suggest, and I erased part of this large wave because the large wave was falling vertically right here at your subject matter. And I love lines. I love the way lines can lead you to the subject, but I felt that that really strong line was taking away versus adding.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Oh, much better.
Anyway,
yeah.
I love the lines. I love that there are lines. Like it makes it like we know we're at the ocean. It's just really the thickness of that line kind of in
Right.
the distance.
Right.
So there you
Wow.
go.
Thank you very much.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate that.
Okay, so moving. I tend to talk to myself a lot. Do you guys like the visuals?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, Adrienne. Why is it not open? Okay. So Adrienne Friesen, is she there? Yes. The title of this piece is Geese. I don't have a size. I think that Adrienne, one of the hardest parts for me seeing this as a viewer is that the image itself is kind of being disrupted by too much light or glare. And that may be the same case where it looked great on your cell phone and I'm now reading it in a more limited screen. So that's the first thing. And I probably, if I darken it a little bit, it would change it a bit. So that automatically improves it. Okay, so I'm assuming that that's kind of more of your actual painting. Now I flipped it back because I can't talk about it with that other screen open. So there are a couple things that are actually really very interesting about this painting. I'm looking at the fact that the sun is coming this way, hitting these little guys, and then popping lights behind these little birds. So I know the direction of the sun. I know where it's coming from, right? And in a way, by focusing the attention here, it seemed to me that you were trying to break up this composition problem where you have two very strong composition points. So you have a dual center of interest, right? So I keep flipping back between these two. I particularly flipped to this guy, this little single guy on this side, because I have one of the areas of greatest contrast, right? So his beak being almost white and this being really almost black, I keep moving there. And I think that really you want us to see this cluster, right? So this is an assumption I'm making. And so based on that assumption, there's a couple things that I would do. And I first want to say that I think the movement in your water, this patterning that you've created where the birds are breaking up the water here, so it's kind of a little bit busy, and then it kind of calms down where you're going in the distance, really helps kind of bring these birds forward. So I think that's really well done. The issues for me would be really in kind of trying to fade that back a bit and trying to really highlight these guys. Okay, so I want to fade this back by kind of taking out these warm tones and kind of making it more gray toned and lightening the darker pieces here. And I'm not successful in using my little tools to show you this, but I will show you what I was able to do, which was I kind of pumped up because, you know, it's for me light and dark. So I'm pumping up the highlights they hit the little birds, right? The little goslings. And what this does visually is it kind of really puts them in as the center of interest. And so I don't tend to want to go back and look here. I have darkened his beak. I would lighten this, my tools wouldn't let me. I think this darkness here should be the same darkness on this side. But by just pumping the light so that these guys are kind of caught in an array of light, I've now sort of separated them. So I now have visually 3 objects instead of 2, and we know odds kind of work a little bit better, right? So that would be my only comment. And, you know, I love, honestly, I love the patterning. I love the fact that we're rounding here. Like you just kind of keep going back to these little guys. So I think that's well done. Just kind of look at your lights and darks. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so closing. Okay, nope. Great. So now we are going to Barbara. Okay, so Barbara, I don't think I know the names of either of your paintings. We're going to do 2 of hers back to back just because of the way I saved them. So this is a 24 by 30, so it's quite a big piece. It is a portrait, and it's done in a very bold, colorful style. So I know a little bit of Barbara's work, and I know that she is a colorist, that color is really important to her. And so I'm looking at this in terms of how I see this painting and the color that she's used. She's using a complement, like she's using blue as her primary background color, and then she's used the complement of orange. And here on this side, she goes to what is almost a pure yellow, right? So the figure itself is kind of darker than the background, so the figure does kind of pull forward. And she's used some highlights to help that happen. So I think that's really powerful. If I'm looking at this, and honestly, if you're standing in a show and you're seeing this painting, like it has visual impact, and I'm really all about visual impact. The problem that I'm having, the first problem that I'm having, and there's not a lot of problems I'm having, is that I find that right here, this pure color, this high chroma color is where my eye keeps going, right? And I don't think that you want me to keep looking here. I think you really want me to be looking at this woman. You want to look at her face, you want to look at her eyes, you want to look at her character, right? Mm-hmm. So this is the thing that I would want to correct, right? So my first instinct is to pull this orange color over, dull this down, push it in the back, right? So if it becomes more muted, it pushes back so she comes forward. But I know that that's not necessarily, you know, knowing the artist, maybe not what she would do. So I decided to take another direction, and you know, knowing the artist kind of helps. And so as a colorist, I'm saying, well, let's make that yellow color make sense, right? So I'm imagining like the light, that this was created by light. So if this is created by light, then her highlights, where her face is really moving forward, could be done in those colors. So I'm pumping up that color that she's using, trying to kind of keep in her technique, right? The other thing that I really want Barbara, for you to look at, is there is a little bit of a tendency when you're doing these faces, and I saw it in both face paintings, that there is a bit of a dark outlining that happens, right? And so this dark outline kind of really, I mean, maybe it's the style you want, and if so, ignore what I'm about to say, but I think that breaking up this outline enriches the painting. So if I go back to my little mock-up, I basically broke this line by, I kind of put in a mid-tone in here, a little bit of blue in here, just to kind of, and I kept, like, the line is still there. It's still just as powerful, but I think by breaking it, you've actually kind of enhanced the 3D quality of the face. The other thing I did want to mention is, I know, like, using midtones, I love the use of midtones. And sorry, I keep making this personal. I think that use of midtones works really well in this painting, but I think that the midtones should not be in the areas that would be kind of coming forward, right? So the top of her nose would be coming forward. And that's why I change and put the highlight on the nose. All right. I also broke up this black a little bit because when you look at the painting, that's a very strong, it's the darkest dark. So I think you need to break it up so it's not the only thing you see. Okay. So that's that one.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great.
Okay, and then you're next again. So we're going to go to your other one. I'm hoping I'm not taking too long. I'm moving. All right. Oops, I did see it. Okay, I'm gonna go faster on this one. All right. So it was kind of neat that you sent 2 portraits, because then I can kind of compare what you're doing in the 2 portraits. This is a very powerful portrait to me. The sense of light is absolutely strong. The light is coming from this side. I have this image of this. This is another 24 by 30, by the way. I have an image of this person kind of just being caught in the light, and this is her center of interest, which is this eye, and it's in the most minimal strokes, and I see an eye. Like, it's very powerfully done, and I think that is highly successful. My critique on this piece, I kind of feel that there is this kind of drawing around the structure of the face, and I think losing some edges would be important. I also find that this really strong white horizontal line here leading us off should be minimized. And this is one of your lightest lights, and I don't think it's meaningful there. So my correction, or not my correction, my suggestion, or my messing with your painting kind of thing here, I basically really wanted to, I couldn't push that back because I couldn't get it to darken, right? But what I did is I removed the white here, and I just popped a little bit of white here so that comes forward. I'm trying to increase depth, right? So I'm looking to increase depth. So that would increase depth by bringing a little bit of lightness here and taking away the whiteness there. I also, this whole haloing that you do where you're kind of equally putting color on both sides. I darken this, and this is as dark as it got, right? So I actually don't mind that color. It kind of bounces off of this color here. So I'm just going to compare the 2. Not a lot of difference, and very, very minimal changes, right? But this is probably primarily the thing that kind of sends us off your painting.
Okay.
So, but very powerful painting. Very, very powerful painting.
Thanks.
Okay. Okay, I'm moving on. I did have a timer set, but I couldn't keep up with it.
You're doing fine.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Just want to make sure I don't miss anybody. Okay, Gary Tube. I don't think Gary's here. Okay, so Gary, I don't know the size of Gary's painting. I'm assuming it's acrylic, but it could be oil. So it's a portrait of a bear, and I love the title of this piece. It's called Bear Salad. So it automatically draws me to his mouth where he's munching on some flowers. So I think that storytelling through the title is really powerful. I think that in this painting, there's a really nice transition of color. This kind of warm, it's actually a warm foresty green. It would normally come forward, but because of the red tones in the bear and then this really light color in the foreground, it actually pushes back. So I think that was highly successful. I think that the composition is really great. I love the face of the bear. He kind of fits in that rule of third, so I really focus on him. My takeaway for Gary, I have 2. I want to kind of look at the use of lines. Okay, so there is a really good use of like the way that you've done the texture of the bear here, but when it comes down here, you're actually sending me off the canvas, and this kind of gives me a feeling that the bear is leaning a bit, right? And that's an easy correction, and I'm going to show you that correction on this little mock-up. So basically, I just did a wash of a dark color here. And what that did is it actually created a shoulder, right? It cut the line. So I'm sending the person really less. Okay, when I learn English, I will do this again. I'm trying. I'm not sending you off the canvas. In fact, like this color kind of pulls you down here and back around, right? So just darkening this little bit made a drastic change. And then because I'm also pushing light, remember I'm pushing dark and pushing light. So I lit up this bit that's in his mouth, right? Because that is my focal point. I want to really make you see it. I want it to be like the first thing you see. And in doing that, I also want to think about contrast. And in order to pull these bits forward here versus the original, here's the original, adding darks in the foreground will pull things forward when it has the most contrast. So this really light color against a really dark color pulls this forward. So it can be done in lots of different ways. I just did it with shadow, and it just changed the way that whole painting reads, right? So I think it's literally, you could do this little fix in 5 seconds, right? The other thing I want to mention on this one, Gary, is the nose is slightly off, right? The drawing of the nose is slightly off. The nostrils are a bit high. And I'm going to give you my experience on this. When you're not doing super realism, the nose doesn't have to be super real. And I have found that sometimes the most, not even the most negative comment I've gotten on my own paintings, but a lot of people don't want to see the nostrils. So I think you can suggest the nostrils rather than draw them in such a, like you're really showing me that because you have a very dark against a very light. So I really see the nostrils. And I think that it doesn't have to be so detailed, right? So that's your takeaway. Okay, so closing that. You're also quiet. I'm kind of scared. Sorry, I just closed this and it's going to ask me to save, so it's going to take a minute.
I love that you're using this Photoshop because that's a real talent or a skill that I would like to be able to do.
You know what? Honestly, I do not have a lot of knowledge of it. And it's actually one of my bucket list items. It's kind of one of the things I want to do this year. So this critique, and I love visuals, and I think people learn better, especially artists, through visuals. So I really found just practicing this was really powerful for me. And it just makes me want to learn more. So, okay, Greta. Okay. So this is a painting, a very large painting called Luminosity. It's a 30 by 36 acrylic on canvas. And I have to say your photo seems to be pretty good. So I'm guessing, I'd love to know this, if you sent it from your iPhone or you sent it from your computer, because I'm betting it was from a computer. So I'm seeing it better, right? So this is an abstract piece. There's a pattern that's kind of created, or it's kind of one of the techniques used in abstract, and it's using this crucifix or cruciform. And it's one of my, like, I have a tendency to kind of love this style. I'm not talking about the painting. I'm trying to make this less personal, but so this cruciform really is kind of a good thing to have in a painting to lead your eye, right? So I noticed that the cruciform itself is kind of the highlight, the center of interest is fitting perfectly on the rule of thirds. I could do this and show you, but I think you guys can all see it, right? So it's right there is my focal point. And then the rest of the canvas, there's a lot of texture going on. So I'm very intrigued by the texture. So you create visual interest with the texture. There's some little lines that are happening that I think, I'm hoping they're a little darker, but maybe they're not. But there's a tension that kind of starts to get created with this piece that sort of makes me feel like things are then moving downwards. So when I'm looking at this piece, Greta, I'm kind of a little bit, I'm not traveling, my eye is not traveling around the canvas. And so I think the goal for you would be to try to make that happen, to try to create a situation where you're telling your story, but you're actually making us see the entire canvas, right? So I did 2 little vignettes for you. And one of them is the simplest of all. And I just, with my Photoshop tool, I just copied a bit of your texture and I put it down here. And what that did is it creates this visual tension. So I come into this painting, I kind of enter it at your, this really large point of contrast, because we as humans tend to do that. And then I kind of go down here, and this kind of pulls me down, right? So now I've moved a little bit more through the canvas, and I think you can push that. And I just stuck in little color bits, right? And I'm not saying that you have to have it look like this. My goal in this is to actually have you take us on a ride through your canvas, because you've got this really powerful image here. And I think you need to balance that out by having us move all around your canvas and come back to it. So that's my takeaway for you. Like, try to look at, is there a way you can move us around this canvas? Can you give us a visual path? You know, it could be through line, it could be through color. There's lots of different ways, but I think that you have to push that a little bit. Okay. So
Thank you very much.
you're welcome. There's luminosity. Okay. Close. Sorry, I get very personal and very involved in your paintings, guys. Just remember, you can reject all of it.
It's really helpful to see it visually, actually. I think it's great. It's much more impactful than just, you know, I'm listening to you describing it.
Well, and especially some of us are better at visuals than at speaking. I'm probably that person. So, okay, Irina. Is it Irina? Irina, she's not here. Okay, so this is a watercolor. It's by Irina Bakumenko, and I'm probably saying your name wrong, so I apologize for that. We have not met. So for me, when I'm looking at this painting, I'm like, my first impact is the detail in the building, right? There is a lot of detail happening here, and to me, when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at the perspective. She's using kind of a 2-point perspective where you have 2 vanishing points, one on either side, and the building kind of is stretched into those perspectives. And it's so well done. I mean, everything kind of follows the line. I tested a couple points, beautifully done. So I'm not a watercolorist, so I can't comment so much on technique. I'm just commenting on it in the way I would comment on any painting. Okay, so when I'm looking at this painting, the first thing that draws my attention, besides the building, which is definitely the focal point, I'm just going to get rid of those lines, is this is really a very dark point of the canvas. And if you're using a photograph, what happens in photographs is where man-made structures like roof lines meet, let's say, what's behind it, you will get a very sharp, dark space. And so this is that very sharp, dark line that is probably created by a photograph. And our job as artists is kind of to fade things as they go back in distance. So we're talking about a linear perspective, right? So as things are further away, they get lighter and grayer, right? So this is the first thing I noticed, that this it would help add depth to this painting. I have to learn my words a little bit better. It would add depth to this painting if that became lighter, like this area here is lighter and grayer, right? So this, if that was lighter and grayer, it would add depth. The other thing that would add depth is if this tree, I need to read that this tree is coming forward because it's in front of the house. And I'm looking at the light source, and based on like the shadows that I'm seeing, the light source is kind of coming straight from the top, right? And I always look for light source. So, sorry guys, touching things. So what I did, and this is not going to be pretty because I don't have like the skill set to do this, but I wanted to show you the change in depth if you change the weight of the colors. Like this, I'm suggesting a darker, more intense color here and a lighter color here. So in my visual, I told you it wasn't pretty. Just by actually darkening this tree that's in the foreground and a little bit of darkening in the foreground here, I've actually created a bit more attention on the house, right? So now this house is really the focal point, and I've lightened to the best of my ability this bit here. But it really changed the way you see this piece, right? So that's my takeaway for you, is to kind of look at things in terms of a linear perspective, or where the foreground gets a little bit darker, the color is less faded, and then let things fade as they go back. And maybe some of these white, like there's a lot of white happening in the foreground, and I think maybe save that for this area because it works really powerfully here, and here it kind of you lose that power of it, right? So that's, I'll just show you one more time. Okay. Okay, so next.
Hmm.
All right. I'm always afraid my computer's gonna crash. So many pictures open. Okay. Okay, we did that. Isabella. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna geek out a little bit here because I actually love still lifes, okay? You never know it because I never do them, but there was a period of a few years where I actually did still lifes, so I really appreciate still lifes. So I know, Isabel, I'm just gonna qualify this. When I saw this piece on Instagram, and your shadows are definitely darker, so this was probably sent from, I don't know that this was sent from your iPhone, it says JPEG. So somehow in saving this, the shadows are getting lost a little bit. So you might want to look at a tool to fix that. So this is a very light, soft palette. It's lavenders and greens. There's this really interesting thing that Isabella did, which from a composition point of view, not everyone's going to love, but she really pumped up the color in this piece here. Now, this composition on this, you know, there's again, it's going to go back to personal opinion, as all rules are kind of subjective. So this is very center focused, and I don't know how deliberate that was. And because I know an artist that does that kind of thing, where he focuses on an object in a still life. And the name of this piece is Transformation in Green. So, you know, you kind of look at this and there's a deliberate intensity, because obviously Isabella does know, you know, how to tone things, how to make things kind of blend a little bit more, how to set them back in space, but she's really, really riveted us to this piece. So I don't know what the purpose was of that, but you know, obviously it's the first thing you see, it is the main thing you see. So I'm gonna kind of work with that. Compositionally, it's a little awkward because you create this very strong vertical. And so you're leading us a little bit off the canvas. And so I kind of want you to think about that. There is a ribbon that's kind of tying these pieces together, but I think that the shadowing on this may be a little weak, and we could probably pump it up and still keep this intensity.
Yes, well,
So,
in editing, I lost a bit of the shadow. Yeah,
okay.
in reality, it has stronger shadow.
It has stronger shadows, and I've seen your paintings and they do. So so the first thing that I did is I actually put in really strong shadows, and I think these may be more intense than what you have based on what I saw when you posted this. So I really think pumping the light and pumping the dark is really an important thing for you to do. And in doing that, look what it did. Like, pumping the light is really important in still life, in my personal opinion. So here is kind of where in the rule of thirds this would sit. And I erased this line. So I'm looking at losing some lines, because in the original version, you're almost drawing the complete circle. Okay, but where the light would hit, which it's reflected here, so the light source is definitely coming here, I would actually want to see some lost edges. And just by losing that edge, like, and making that contrast kind of happen right there, like you move the eye right there, right? Like, it changes where your eye rests in this painting. And I just want to push this back, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that for me is kind of what I think you should really look at: pumping your lights, pumping your darks. There is a little bit of a drawing issue, I think, on the top of this bottle. the bottoms of the apples, the bottom of this, the bottom of this, the top of this, they all like show me having this camera or this viewpoint kind of here looking down, but this is looking straight at us because this would tilt a little bit this way. So I look at that, see if I'm right. I don't know if I'm right. And I think we have to be careful of this edge under here, which then makes this read as a straight line. Okay, so that's the same in the original, right? So I'm sorry, I was using my version, but I meant to use the original. But because I said I want to geek out, I want to show you a painting, and I want you to look up this artist, just because I think you're going to fall in love as I did. So I have this favorite artist. His name is David Chifetz, Chifetz, and I love it. Whenever I can show anyone his work, I do. He has become famous for still lifes. He's from Washington State, and this was kind of ironic that he's got the same little glass structure, what is a vase that you have. So, but look at how he muted these guys down, but intentionally intensified this, and this falls on the rule of thirds, right? So I think composition is really important, and I think that idea of using the intensity is really, like, I love the idea. I love that in this one he reflected some of that color, and I think that would work for you too. So it's just a thought, but I don't know if you know that artist. Here's one more of his pieces, and I'll just show you this because I'm a total geek when it comes to still life. So I'm sorry, you'll have to tolerate that. That's another one of his pieces. And so he intentionally picks an item and just like gives it this bright light superpower. And so, oh, I love it. Anyway, enough of David Chifetz. Okay. Sorry, did I lose you all on that one?
No, over here.
Okay. All right, who is next? Okay, Janice. Okay, so here again, I think we have a problem with the lighting, and Janice, I really want you to look at your computer settings and maybe pick up a tool that will change the lighting, because when I look, so I did not do anything to her painting, okay? So what I did do, oh, hello, Donald. I did pump up the color and look at the difference that made.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. All right.
So when you are sending your painting to someone who is, when you're doing it online, it probably is different, but if you are submitting by email one of your paintings, this is what they're seeing.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so I keep that in mind because that's important. So I'm going to talk about this version as if that's what I received. Okay, so
Okay.
I don't know if I made this a little brighter than the original. I have no idea, right? But when I did this, it changed everything, because then I started to see this color combination of the purples and the greens, which are super powerful. There's a really strong sense of line here and paths to travel. So I kind of entered this painting right around here because this patterning really is, humans are attracted to patterns. So this kind of attracts me, and I come here where I have this point of light, and I just travel through this entire painting until I finally kind of go back here. You know, and there's not a lot of bringing me back, but I come back anyway because I pop back to this extreme color change. And so you have a really nice sense of light in this piece, and it's powerful, right? So I have very few things that I would want you to look at in this, and I think you're first of all, no one else would probably pick this up except for another artist. But if you squint at your painting, you are going to see that the darkest dark is right here. And so that is really far in the distance, and your darkest darks should be here.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And
Yeah.
so if you dulled these down, okay, and I'm not saying it can't look like a dark color, but it has to be more gray, right? Like a gray green versus, I'm not saying gray, do not use gray, but a green that has been dulled down. Like if you look at even like this color in here, like that would just push you like further into here. And I kind of feel like this blocks your ability to go to the water. So if that were a lighter color, you would actually travel to the water, right? And it kind of extends into here. So it's, and the way I kind of sometimes think about landscapes is I kind of think of it in terms of the lines of the landscape. And as you draw the next line, that what's behind it should recede, right? So that's, you're creating that sense of space. And so there is a little bit of a stop that's happening here. But honestly, no, you show this to anybody, they're not going to say that, right? So this again is just an artist kind of critique where we start to look for things to pick out. The other thing I would pick out, there's one other thing. This mountain range reads the same color as here, and it may be the way I colored this, so it's hard for me to kind of comment on, but I think that this has to read just a little bit duller, so that these two don't become the same. You see, all of that seems to be in the same tone. Do you guys see it? So this has to be pushed a little bit more gray, and then your space in this, you're going to feel like you're going for 100 miles in this painting, right? So that's that.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. How are we doing? Are you all still awake?
Mhm. Very interesting.
It's wonderful.
Thank
Yeah.
you. I'm relieved. I must need that feedback. Okay. All right. Catherine Ross.
Yes,
What number am I on? Catherine Ross. Catherine Ross. I want to make sure I didn't miss anybody on my list. Okay. So you're number 14 and we have 19. So there you go.
Okay.
All right. So Catherine, this is a 18 by 24 oil. The title is Barefoot in the Sand. So I'm seeing this painting of a young girl. I'm assuming she's young, and she's actually running or leaping through the sand, kind of into the distance, right? And it's the reason I know she's leaping, which is kind of really interesting, is I'm looking at her feet. It says barefoot in the sand. So I really want to focus on her feet. And I see that she's elevated off the sand. So that's kind of really interesting because you see that she's going to touch down, like there is a shadow under her foot. And if you look at the feet, they're the way you've painted the feet is really, really realistic. Like it's really believable. I first thought maybe the angle was a little bit off, but I mean, it really doesn't matter because it's really all about that like leap of joy, right? So I don't know if that angle's off. I know that this is beautifully executed. So maybe you can look at your reference and see if it is, or if
No, I
it's
really concentrated on that reference. It does look like that.
Okay. Okay. So anyway, so when I'm looking at your painting, again, I want to comment on the colors and your image. Maybe your image is losing some of its color because of you have to change it in your computer. So I do want to.
It is quite pastel-y.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is. So, okay, so here's the things that I would look at that maybe I would suggest exploring. Okay, I'm trying to use better words. So right here, she's running into the distance, and the distance I'm guessing this is probably crashing surf because we know it's a beach, right? This would then most likely be clouds. It's hard to tell, and it probably doesn't matter. What really matters to me is that the color of that and the color of this are the same. So what happens with that is that the two flatten the image. So instead of feeling like I'm running into the depth, I feel like it's a very flat image. Okay, so there's two things that I would do. I would darken this a little bit, and I would lighten this a little bit. And you're going to see that that makes a world of difference. So I'm going to flip this over to my piece. Okay. So do you see, like I figured, you know, with the lighting, and sometimes I make stuff up in my own paintings, there would be some darker sand. So if I go back to your piece, the darkest sand is here, which is kind of really in the distance, so it should read a little lighter. So I think there needs to be a bit darker sand here. It doesn't have to be as much as I did, but it has to, like, I feel adding that weight here, that dark color here, lifted her foot even higher. It actually made you really look at her feet in this painting. Okay, so I think that's important. And you know, you can look at this and decide. And again, I'm not trying to change your vision. The other thing that I actually found was the little dog in the original painting looks very faded, as if he's far in the distance. But I think he's a little dog. Like, I don't think that structurally he looks like a big dog running far away. I don't feel that sense of distance. So I think that dog needs to kind of be darkened so he doesn't feel like he's you know, that you had to fade him because he's far away. And I know that doesn't seem important, but it does, because it visually, it kind of sets him in space, right? The other thing I did, because I'm all about light, right? And I would almost, won't let me do an adjustment. I also kind of thought you had this beautiful little dot of light here, right? In your painting, little dot of light, and then there's the surf. I think that the surf doesn't have to be a solid line. And hitting that surf with light, hitting this little area with light, bringing light over to the feet, I think creates a really nice pattern and transition versus just having just that little bit, right? So that's kind of what I think. And then I you could pump up a little bit of light here, but I don't even think it's necessary, right? Just by darkening this, it pumps this up.
The background actually was above that little thing of white there, like the, you know, that kind of goes through the painting. That it's a,
You're saying this,
surf. Yeah,
saying,
the white part. It actually, the reference had a hill all in behind her, and I just thought it didn't really.
oh yeah, I'm glad you didn't put the hill in, because it would have, I think, taken away from this imagery.
Yeah, I
So-
didn't like it, so I tried to, but I didn't quite know what to.
I honestly, I think you did the right thing. I think it's just a question of the tones that you use. Like, you could use a grayer color. It definitely had to be, it had to not match this, right?
Yeah.
Because that's pulling it forward.
Right.
Okay. So I think you're next again. Da, 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 da. Okay. We're getting close, kids. Okay, so this is 9 by 12, so it's tiny. It's, in my world, it's tiny. And it's a 9 by 12. I believe it's oil again.
Yep.
And it's called Almost Ripe. So we're looking at green pears. We're actually looking at a branch of green pears. And so it's the pears are dangling from the top. And one of the things that I think, first of all, I think the composition really works. There's a little bit of a problem with these two competing in space, but I like, obviously you've put the highlights on this piece and it's right in the rule of thirds. So it actually has a lot of power in that position. It also, there's this little thing, and it's subtle. I can't really see it because I think the image could be enhanced, but there's a little bit of curving that happens in your background. And, you know, and I find that really brings the eye around, right? So the coloring on the leaves, well done. They feel like some are drooping, some are turning, like it really creates a lot of interest. So I think that's very well done. So now, because, you know, you hired me to do a critique and I have to find something wrong with it, right? Like, no, I'm kidding. So there is a couple really subtle things that I would do for this painting, and you can totally ignore them, but it just kind of, for me, was something to think about, right? So I did go and color correct the photo. So I didn't change the color of anything. I just color corrected the photo, and that it makes a difference, I think, a powerful difference. So now I see all these nice warm tones you have going on. In the original, okay, I'll tell you what I did in this painting here. This is the original, and this, you don't see it as much in because everything's so muted, but this is a really warm red tone happening in this kind of one dying leaf, right? When I color corrected it, and I probably should have given that version, I found that became suddenly very much a center of interest, right? My eyes went to that warm tone. It's the only strong warm tone in the painting. Okay, so what I wanted to do, and I started trying to do it, is I added a little bit of that warm tone to the bottom of your point of interest, because then my eye, like I see there's a little bit of that warm tone here, a little bit warm tone here, but a little bit more of it here, and I didn't probably put enough. I put a little dot there, a little dot here, and that kind of made my eye travel down here. And with this contrast of light and dark and a little bit of that warm tone, I think it really helps your eye kind of continue to circulate through this painting, right? So it gives us a nice pathway for the painting. So then one more thing, because, you know, I can't just stop at that. I did add some lights and darks. So this is in this piece here, I didn't adjust any of the lights or darks. I just talked adding this little warm tone. But in this final version, I wanted to see, and I didn't know, honestly, how I can remove the importance of this pair when they're both set up equal, like they're pretty equal in size, they're fairly equal in position, they're connected, right? So if you look at the difference, I took the highlight off of this pair. So by taking the highlight off of that one, it really pumps the highlight on this one. So I also, because I'm pushing light, I intensified the light that is on this pair a little bit on behind it, losing an edge, because, you know, we love to lose edges, and then a little point here. And I think that kind of really stopped that competition with the second pair.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a really subtle thing. It's really just washing a little bit of color in darkening the shadow, because your shadow was already there. Like I didn't create a new shadow. I used the shadow you had already created. You see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's it. That's my 2 cents on that one. Okay.
Great.
Sure.
That
Great.
one got into the Kamloops show and it just came back. I should have had actually the real painting in front of me. It did get in that show, but I wanted to do a bigger version of it. So
Yeah.
it's nice to know these.
Well, I find the perspective really interesting, the way it's just kind of suspended, right? And then you have this soft background kind of playing with these soft draping leaves. I mean, I honestly, like, I was struggling to just resolve this. This was the only thing that really bothered me, right? And that obviously is not going to bother everybody. It's just for me,
Like you mean like the fact that
they're competing.
They compete, yeah.
Yeah, that was the only thing. Okay.
Okay.
All right, onward. Okay. Okay, Lorraine. Okay. So Lorraine didn't give me any size on this painting. It's a vineyard scene. My guess is it's done in oils just based on the texture that I'm seeing. So it's a fairly limited palette. We're doing, she's using a lot of purples in the foreground, and then she kind of puts in hits of blue as she reseeds this piece. This is the wrong piece, sorry. This is the piece. So she has this whole stepping thing that's happening where you're stepping back into this mountain. As you go higher, you start to see more blues. It gets a little cooler. This framing technique that she's using, I think works really well with this this composition, because we are seeing, like, we automatically are focused to see through these trees, right? So I really love that. It's not something that you don't see a lot of it. I mean, and if you do, not so much in such a small piece. So I think that's a really good composition tool to kind of, pardon? So anyway, somebody's talking. Okay, so where was I? So when I'm looking at this, I also think you have a problem with your photograph, Lorraine, because it's looking very faded. And probably if I went to adjust it, this may be a little bit more of what the painting looks like. I'm guessing there's some pretty intense yellow greens coming, chartreuse colors coming in. So I'm guessing that's the actual painting. So there's a very powerful color palette that's happening. Let me get this. Now, one of the things that I noticed, or in a landscape. And I want you to kind of think about is overlapping shapes. So this foreground is a very straight line. And in nature, we don't really see a lot of straight lines. I think one of the ones that I recognize really in paintings is maybe that horizon line when you're talking about water meeting land, but there's not a lot of other really super straight lines unless you're doing some stylized piece, right? So this piece is more abstracted, and I feel that this really harsh edge kind of makes me feel that the painting is cut off here. So what I did for your piece is I actually wanted to introduce a foreground. Okay, and so this is really part of your takeaway, because you're trying, I see you're trying to build towards greater depth and having a strong foreground. And this is just shapes, right? Like I don't know how to use these tools, and a couple verticals. So I took the trees and I added just some of the trunk just to create a little bit of vertical, and it kind of helps with the framing. And then I just did this very ragged, contrasting kind of grasses, if you want to call it that. And it's just adding a lot of dark shapes and some light shapes. And my lights didn't quite come out, but by putting this in, I'm actually helping the background to recede. So I'm actually creating more depth through the use of adding a foreground. So that's the first thing that I would like you to kind of try, Lorraine, and focus on. And you could probably, if you liked it, you could add it to this painting. It would be a pretty easy fix. The other thing is, if you squint at this painting, and squinting is a really good tool, especially when you're, doing things that have a lot of abstract in them and you are creating a landscape. So when I squint, I see this color here is kind of the tones of this one. Now, if I go back to my adjusted image, I gotta adjust it again. This obviously is darker. So, but what I want you to do is I want you to think of, as you go higher, the items, I'm like retail, the color becomes more grayed out. So it becomes more muted. And I don't want to say it becomes lighter, because you would just add white, and that's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to make it kind of a softer version of this color by adding gray to this color or turning it into a more gray color. And that would push that mountaintop higher. And so what we're trying to do is kind of create that height, and we're creating the depth with the foreground. So those are your two takeaways. So that's that. Okay. We're getting down there, guys. Quiet in the gallery. I missed somebody. Michelle. Okay. So this is and I've actually seen this painting in person, so I know it's probably about a 9 by 12. It's not much bigger than that. It's called
16 by 20.
16 by 20. I was standing way too far away. So it's the Kasugi Gardens, and that's here in Kelowna, right?
You're right.
Yes. Okay. I've actually been there. So when I'm looking at this, I think we have another photography problem. Did this come to me from your cell phone?
I have no idea. Probably.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I really think that as a general rule, we should all start saving our photos on our computers, because we then are much more in control of the resolution. We're in control of the color, right? So when I look at your image and I color correct it, or I just correct the exposure is all I'm doing. I'm not color correcting anything. The minute I start doing that, it changes everything, right? Is that closer to real, or is that a little dark?
It's a little dark.
Okay.
But that's closer.
Okay. But that's dramatically different than what I would be looking at if I'm looking at the image that came to me, right? So this painting, it's kind of one of those paintings where the bridge sort of tries to overtake the composition, because it is the man-made structure in the piece. And I like that you have it fairly centered, but slightly off-center. The composition on this, there's a lot of stuff happening. It's a very, very full painting. A lot of us don't do paintings like this, but I do find that there's a lot of things that are working to lead me back into this painting. And the first one, that when I look at the water, I'm looking at how these lily pads are very spaced out as I'm looking in the foreground. And as I recede into the background, they start to become closer and closer and closer. And so it gives me this great sense of depth. The other thing that really adds depth to this is by adding these man-made structures in the back, you can really see how deep into this painting you can walk. And so for me, depth is like super important. So I'm always like very, very strongly drawn to these paintings that can show me some depth. And you've accomplished that really, really well. So the difficulty with a painting like this is like when you look at what's going to make this painting pop. Okay. And so when I look at this, there's a lot of color happening. I think you did a really good job of balancing these two pieces. I'm going to kind of go to, well, I'll stay here, because this is a really strong color. It's good that it's in the front because it's a warm red, rusty red color. So, but you balance that really nicely with some of your darkest darks right here and these pops of yellow. So I really find that really helps with the transitioning from foreground to middle ground to background, right? When I'm looking at this painting, I finally see this guy, right? You've positioned him right on the rule of thirds. So I'm going to have to close this. We're going to go back to a little doll, but he's positioned on this rule of thirds. So I kind of think maybe he was your focal point. Is that correct?
Well, yes, I certainly put him there so you get back there.
Okay. So I'm going to pop now to my little demo piece. Okay. So here's my demo piece. I probably have the color wrong because I was guessing. I just basically did what we just did. So when I looked at this piece and I see, you know, in this garden, there's this bridge and there's this person there, and you put this person there for a reason. And I think we always tend to look for people, right? So if this is your point of interest where you want me to travel to, what I did in this piece, looking at the original, you see, I just illuminated this edge of the bridge. I put a little bit of light on the back of the person and I reflected it on this where it meets the land. And that changes the focal point. Like it really pushes your focal point. It also made me notice this though. And I think that really white plant, which may actually, you know, be there, it starts to compete. Now I have two competing points. So I think that this has to be dulled down. So it has to become a little bit of a duller white, but I think that this, like this, oh, and I did reflect a little bit in the water of this light. So it helped with this patterning back. But I think it's like really like, this is a very powerful piece. I think your changing and your changes in value as you go back in space really work. Like, look how grayed out this is. When I talk about grayed out, this is kind of a very dark tree, but it's very grayed out. Some of the more traditional painters, which I'm not one of, but they would basically probably say you need to soften these top lines here. Because as things go higher in space, you know, they become softer. They, you know, you have that aerial perspective kind of happening. And those are pretty sharp lines. So it kind of brings them forward a little bit because they are so sharp. So if those were dulled down a little bit, you know, softened, rather than not dulled down, softened, they would recede. Okay, so that would be like the only comment I have is, you know, pump your focal point and maybe soften this edge.
So what about that bridge being so dark?
You find the bridge, I don't find the bridge
I
so,
like that. I'm wondering what you think.
well, based on this, and you know, again, it's like I'm looking at the coloration, right? It's very gray. Like you've grayed out that bridge and you have a darker dark here so that I still feel that sense of depth. I mean, you could totally gray it out more. I don't know. I mean, I think this is where maybe if you saw it in person, it would make a difference. Yeah.
I like it dark.
It's not coming forward to me right now. You know,
Okay.
someone else may see it differently. I don't feel like that's what you want to look for. Is it pulling forward so that it's compressing your sense of depth? And I don't think it is because it's a grayed out color.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm gonna, oh, did I change it? Okay. I think we're down to 2 more, guys. All right. It's kind of ironic that the person that went first is also going last. I didn't mean to do that to Carol. Okay, so.
Yeah, that's mine again.
Yes, it's yours again. So
So
is
this one I
Michelle's-
need help with, so I'm really anxious to hear what you have
Well,
to say.
it's kind of, this is a really tough one for me, Michelle, and you know, the fact that you say you need help kind of scares me. So here's the thing. So when I first see this painting, it has a lot of presence, right? It has this, people are attracted to patterns, and there is a strong patterning that happens in this piece. So I'm very intrigued when I see this to figure out what this pattern is. And then I start to look for the focal point because, you know, as an artist, that's what we do. But my eye naturally has this kind of fight that happens. So there's 3 things really. I'm following this path, this path back to here, but I find there's a proportional issue because if this is a tree, why is this path so large? Right? So because a road versus a tree would not even be a third of this size. So I kind of like, I'm trying to mentally make sense of that, right? Because, and then the other thing is this is your lightest area. So you want me to look here, right? So I'm kind of fighting because I naturally, we like to follow very strong lines, and this is a very strong line. The other thing that I'm really fighting is I'm trying to make sense of why this tree would be so large if these trees are so small. So I'm visually challenged to make sense of this painting, right? So, you know, then I thought, okay, well, if we cropped it, I can't, it won't let me crop it. I'll show you some other point. If we cropped it and like, let's say drew a line here, then it would become all about the path and the patterns, and it would change everything, right? So then I thought, okay, well, that's now changing the artist's vision. So let's not do that. Let's do this. So if I crop the top of that painting, then this tree seems a little bit less out of proportion.
Yeah.
Right. And when
I knew there was something.
but I'm going to kind of go somewhere else with this. So you see, there's a lot of space here that doesn't add to the painting. I don't go into it for any reason. So this tree, although this is really beautifully done, it kind of makes me not believe the rest of it, right? And by the way, like your mountains are beautifully faded in the back. I really enjoy that, and I enjoy the way you did the trees. This section here is a wall stopping me because it's so much further away from this tree, yet it's really dark. So I think it has to be grayed out. So I did do a version where I took this and I grayed that out. Okay, let's see if it comes out. Okay, in a very funny way, right? But that's all the only tool I had. So just look at the 2 of these.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just by lightening that or graying it out, it creates a bit more depth in your painting. Okay. So that is kind of where I'm working. Oh, I also, and you didn't see it, I also experimented with the fact that blue is a cooler color and it recedes, and purple is warmer, so it comes forward. So I kind of feel this should have been a dark purple. So in this version, this funky version of mine, I changed that to purple to help everything recede. Okay. But so here's my thing with this one. Okay. I'm gonna go on a limb, and you can totally reject it. So I don't want to make you paint a certain way. But I'm just going to go there. So my thinking was sometimes maybe we overcrop our images, or we see a vision, but we can't convey that vision to the rest of the world. So I created a new vision of your painting just to kind of show you the difference. So I just cut up pieces of your painting. Okay. So,
Ooh, I like it.
so suddenly your tree makes sense because this is like you did this is the, you know, right here is where I've just cut your painting up. Let's just
No,
okay.
go
So,
yeah.
by pulling this tree into your painting, it made all of this amazing sun rays, like the sun, the way it's hitting the earth makes sense. And this, I do have this on the third. So it sort of reads like a focal point, but it actually, you can have this as the focal point because that's where you're leading me to with your lines, right? I'm leading you through this to the lines. This still is strong. I would kind of weaken that a little bit because I don't know that that path is important, but if you left it here, it would kind of lead you into the horizon. So you got a lot of things happening, but your whole point, I think, was to show how powerful those shadows were. And I think sometimes you have to give us as viewers a little bit more of the story. So
Yeah, well, you go by a photo that captured you, and then you think, and then you get there and it's not working.
yeah,
Yeah, so I just should have been creative in the beginning.
but even
almost.
if you like, I'm just going to crop this, okay, to what would have been your painting. Even if you just did that, and because you were attracted to these patterns, that is quite beautiful, right? I mean, you don't even need this. Like, you could have had whatever you had going on. You don't need the foreground. You had this going on. Even just kind of doing that, right? Like it now the path becomes the focal point, and your patterns are just kind of helping me step through this path. So, like, there's lots of versions of what you could do with this. And I think, but the thing is to be convincing, in whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Even if you did a fantasy painting, be convincing me it should be a fantasy painting. So anyway, so that is that.
Yes, thank you.
Don't crop. Sorry. I knew I was going a little on the edge by recreating your painting.
No. I mean, that's how we learn here.
Okay. All right. I think we're down to Carol being the last one. Okay, Carol was our first, and now she's our last. Did I miss anyone? I don't know if I missed anyone. I hope not. Okay. Wow, I did a PowerPoint on this one. Okay, so this is Carol's. It's called Arguing with Dragons, which I thought was a really brilliant name. It is pen and ink, so it's not a painting. It's a pen and ink drawing, and I think there's lots of washes of color in it. It's 9 by 12, so it's a fairly small piece. In my world, it's a small piece. And it's a little bit abstracted. It's a little bit of realism. It's kind of in some ways, it's kind of a journey. Like, I see it as a journey, especially with this title. So because this is the area that's the darkest, I tend to enter the painting here, and then I travel this path that she's taking me on to kind of wind back to here. So I do find the composition actually really works. It's done in a very soft, muted palette. There may be some opportunity to kind of help the movement a little bit by adding just a few more darks, because if I squint, I'm really powerfully sitting here, and I'm sitting here, and this is the dragon, right? So but for me, I'm kind of looking at this painting, and I'm trying to kind of figure out what's in here. So she's caught me in the story, right? So I think that from that point of view, it's a super powerful piece because you're totally caught up in it. You want to know what she's doing, arguing with dragons. There's an impression that she's opening her jacket and all of this stuff is coming out, right? So I think that is super successful. And so then, I said that I started off saying, so when you invite someone to critique something, you're saying to them, okay, I challenge you to find something in my painting that could be done differently, or could be changed, or could be pushed. What do you think? Give me an opinion. So I'm like, wow, I don't know, and so maybe I would do nothing to this painting, but I had to try. Okay, so this is me trying, Carol. So it doesn't mean that I would even do any of these things. So I actually thought, okay, what if I moved the dragon to the point of interest where the rule of thirds are? And I actually found that made it a weaker painting. So that made it a weaker painting because now the dragon is more diminutive. Sorry, it's getting late. And so I kind of felt your composition was stronger. I then did a third one. What's this one? where I moved the person lower, right? So you see the difference, guys? So here's the original. And here's the person being moved lower. Now I couldn't repeat the darkness, right? Like the powerful darks that she had in that. But I actually think that maybe because your darkest darks were in this person, if this person were slightly smaller as in this drawing, and obviously you'd put the leg in proportion, then there's a little bit even more, it feels a little more ominous fighting with this dragon or arguing with this dragon. So that's just a thought, but I don't think it's necessarily better than the original. I think it's just another way of seeing it, right? So that's it. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anita.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I do have one more thing I want to pull up. Can I pull up one more thing? Sorry, before you guys all fall asleep.
Not
Okay.
falling asleep.
So this appeared in my feed, actually, ironically, yesterday when I was working on all this. And it was a story of a piece that the artist didn't like. It was kind of, took a heavy hit on critiques. And then now in terms of history, it's become like a well-known piece. And I didn't write which piece it was, but this was the quote from the marketing article. It's so easy to dismiss work in the present as unimportant or unworthy, yet we never know what future generations may think of the things we say and do. So I kind of looked at that, and it says, maybe your failure hasn't failed. And it was kind of very inspiring to me because we all have those pieces that we struggle with. So I'm just sharing this little thought. That's it.
Thank you very much, Anita. That was really, really good.
Yeah.
I learned a lot. It's amazing how much we can learn, not just from having our own art critiqued, but watching other people's art critiqued too, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, Anita, where are you? I've lost you. There you are. Which Hollywood square? Obviously, you have put a lot of effort and thought into this, and we certainly appreciate it. And we do hope you'll come back.
I'm stuck here in my house.
I really appreciated seeing the changes visually on the painting as opposed to just talking about it.
Yeah, thanks. I thought, I mean, honestly, I think we're visual people, right? Like we are just super visual people. So I was happy to do that. So
No, really,
So much. It was fantastic.
It was
critique. Yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting to see too, when you put it on the computer and you make those changes that you go, well, maybe I want to make this change, but is it going to work? Am I going to have to like white it all out and start again?
Oh, and listen, here's what I think. I think that if it's a major change, start a new piece. Just think about the takeaway, but don't necessarily change your piece, because as you said, like your piece, for instance, got into a juried show.
Yeah.
Right. So it doesn't mean that your piece is not, what's that word in that, not worthy. Look, I'm tying it back, people. It just means it's another way of seeing that piece, right?
Yeah.
And
I liked it so much better what you did.
Yeah.
I really did.
Yeah.
Then I was
do it again.
Has anybody got any questions?
Well, I do have a quick question because Denise, you said that if something is critiqued, we can't enter it into a show. Is that right, Anita? That if you I just thought if you did it in a class, you couldn't enter it into a show.
I don't think that's the case.
No, I don't believe that's true.
I don't think
that's
it's true either.
Well, and who's to say, and if you think that it might be true, don't change your piece. Right? Like I mean, what if I were your friend sitting next to you and I said, oh, I hated that color blue, and you changed it to orange, would that mean it's critiqued? Like, I mean, you know what I mean? Like,
no, but a critique where you're actually holding a critique like this.
To make changes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think if you don't change it, you're totally in the clear.
Because I know there was some question when we were doing the workshop and we were critiquing then.
But I thought it was that if you paint a painting in a workshop with an instructor with you, then that is not allowed.
Correct.
But if you bring a painting that you painted to somebody and ask for some advice or, like a critique like this, even if you made a minor change to it, I still don't see how that would be
Yeah.
disallowed in a show.
I'll tell you what, I'll look into the policy and
Yeah.
I'll have it posted in next newsletter.
That would be good
That
to know.
sounds good. Okay.
In
Yeah.
Liz
Good to know.
Wilson's workshop, because we didn't paint along with her doing the same painting.
Right, right.
Then that would not count. But she felt that each week she'd give us some thing to think about, maybe it was color or something, and we would come up with our own idea about that, and we would talk about them, but she felt those were FCA allowed.
Who's this, Michelle?
That was Liz Wilson's workshop.
It was a mentoring session.
Kit's
Yeah,
the one
because-
that's speaking. Kit is the one that would know for sure because she deals with this all the time because of
Mhm.
membership, right?
It's the kind of workshop where you say you're all going to do sunflowers. Let's do it. You start here, you go here. Those aren't. But
Yeah.
the others,
Diana Palmer, do you know?
They just say workshops. That's
Oh,
it.
okay.
So if it's a workshop of any sort, then no, it's not acceptable. But they don't say anything about mentoring or critiquing. I
Okay.
think it's.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know.
this was amazing and so good for Zoom. And I don't know how, if anyone's ever done that much work for us. So
Yes,
Well,
thank
lot of
you.
work.
really, really good. Yeah, that's what I want to do too.
Thank you
Because I-
guys. It was really my pleasure, honestly. And I hope that you guys take away some positive from this. I'm always so worried about doing a critique because I don't want people to take anything negative. But honestly, if you take, I think this is a very valuable program using Photoshop. And I think you can use it to kind of work on your images before you paint them. So you learn it. I think it will become the new norm, really.
Yeah, I'm just learning it too. It's great. It's
Okay, Carol, we want a workshop on Photoshop.
There you go.
teaches it.
There you go.
When you can do it, Anita,
Pardon?
and you can teach us.
You can
Oh,
just-
I don't have, there's a lot of really cool things that can be done that I have no knowledge of. Like I'm actually self-teaching. So I'm basically, I say, I want to do this. How do I do it? And so then I'll Google, because Google's my new best friend. And I'll say, hey, Google, how do I, darken a spot on an image, and there is a way that I could put two images together next to each other. And I did do that initially, but I kept finding that and that way you could see my before and my after, right? Your before and my after. But as I kept doing that, things would move and it would crash. So there is a way to do that and I haven't learned it yet, but I will learn it because it'll be better next time.
Screen.
Awesome.
All right.
Okay, well, I
Thank
think
you,
that's
guys.
it. I guess it's a wrap. So we'll see you next meeting. Stay safe, everyone.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you so
Thank you very much. It was
Bye,
wonderful.
Bye.
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 Bye.